Jedediah Stone believed the world was made of two things: traps and the fools who fell into them. And he was no fool. He was a master of the subtle craft of snare and deadfall, a man who could read the forest floor like a page in a book. He could tell you the weight of a deer from its track, the mood of a bear from a scratch on a tree. In the unforgiving wilderness of Black Ridge Mountain, he was not a visitor. He was the resident expert, the top of the food chain. He had built his reputation on a simple, unshakable confidence in his own skill, until the day he woke up and discovered he was both the trapper and the fool. He was hanging upside down, his own rope biting deep into his ankle. But the terrifying part wasn't the searing pain or the blood pounding in his head. It was the giant, silent horse that stood watching him, and the shocking, intelligent reason it was there. Consciousness returned not as a gentle dawn, but as a violent assault. The first thing Jed felt was the fire in his left ankle. It was a hot, searing pain, a circle of agony where the rope of his own masterfully tied snare had cinched tight to the bone. The second sensation was the blood, a thick, heavy torrent pounding against his eardrums, filling his head with a nauseating pressure that threatened to split his skull. The world was a dizzying, inverted nightmare. His throat was raw and his stomach churned. He squeezed his eyes shut, then forced them open again, trying to fight the vertigo, trying to make sense of the horrifying geometry of his situation. He remembered a flash of movement: the cougar. He had been tracking Scarface for 3 days, the cunning, ghost-like mountain lion that had developed a taste for livestock and a reputation for savagery. He'd found its tracks, fresh in the new snow. He remembered his own horse shying away, spooked by the predator's scent. He remembered giving chase, crashing through the undergrowth, his focus absolute, his confidence unwavering. And then, nothing. A sickening lurch, a flash of white as his head hit the snow, and then the cold, silent dark. He had run right into his own trap. The irony was so bitter it almost made him choke. Jedediah Stone, the man who could outsmart any beast, had been outsmarted by a loop of rope and his own careless pride. Panic, cold and sharp, began to set in. He was exposed, an easy meal for any predator, including the one he'd been hunting. He gritted his teeth, fighting the waves of dizziness, and tried to swing his body, to build momentum, to reach for the main trunk of the tree. It was useless. Every movement sent a fresh wave of agony through his ankle and made the world spin faster. Exhausted, he stopped, hanging limp, his breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. It was in that moment of surrender, in that sudden, terrifying quiet, that he realized he was not alone. He heard it first, the soft crunch of snow under an immense weight. It was slow, deliberate, unhurried. Jed twisted his head, his neck screaming in protest, and his heart stopped. Emerging from the dense, snow-laden pines was a creature from a legend. It was a horse, but to call it a horse felt like an understatement. It was a giant, a behemoth of black muscle and midnight fur. A Shire, bigger than any he had ever seen, wild and untamed. A white blaze ran down its face, and its eyes, dark and intelligent, regarded him with an unnerving calm. This was Titan, the phantom stallion of Black Ridge, a creature whispered about in taverns but rarely ever seen. And he was not just passing by. He stopped, deliberately, right in front of Jed, close enough that Jed could feel the heat radiating from its massive body, close enough to see the frost crystallizing on its whiskers. Fear, a pure and primal thing he hadn't felt in years, washed over Jed. This was no ordinary horse. A wild stallion, especially one of this size and power, should have been aggressive, or at the very least, skittish. But Titan showed no fear, no anger. He simply stood there, a silent, black mountain of an animal, and watched. His gaze was not the vacant stare of a dumb beast. It was focused. It was intelligent. It felt analytical. Jed felt like a specimen under a microscope, his frantic, undignified struggle being observed by a superior silent intelligence. The hunter had become the hunted, and the trapper had become the specimen. He hung there, his life dangling by a thread, utterly at the mercy of a creature whose intentions were a terrifying, unreadable mystery. Time. in Jed's inverted world, ceased to be measured in minutes or hours. It was measured in heartbeats, in the agonizing throb from his ankle, in the slow, creeping numbness in his fingers as the cold seeped into his bones. The horse, Titan, did not move. It did not attack. It did not leave. It simply stood its silent, unnerving vigil. This, Jed realized, was a form of torture more profound than any quick, violent end. It was a psychological war. His mind, sharpened by years of tracking and survival, raced through a frantic cycle of emotions. First came the raw terror, the certainty that this massive beast was simply waiting for him to weaken before it trampled him into the snow. He shouted at it, his voice a hoarse croak, hurling insults and threats that sounded pathetic and hollow in the vast, silent forest. The horse merely flickered an ear, unimpressed. Then came anger, a hot, defiant rage at his own stupidity. How could he have been so careless? He cursed himself, cursed the trap, cursed the mountain. He struggled again, a futile, thrashing burst of energy that left him gasping, his vision swimming with black spots. The horse watched his pointless struggle with the same detached patience, its great dark eyes following his every move. Next came pleading, as the cold deepened and the pain became a constant, grinding reality. His arrogance crumbled. "Just go," he whispered, the words barely audible. "Just leave me be." He was a hunter, but now he prayed for the predator to simply lose interest, to grant him the mercy of a solitary death. But Titan remained, his presence as constant and indifferent as the ancient pines that surrounded them. Finally, as the hours wore on and his strength ebbed away, a strange, new feeling emerged, exhausted observation. With nothing left to do but hang there, Jed began to truly watch the horse. He stopped seeing it as just a monster or a phantom. He started seeing the details. He noticed the intelligence in its eyes was not a figment of his fear. It was real. He saw how Titan's head would turn, its ears swiveling like antennae, catching sounds from the forest that Jed couldn't hear. It wasn't just standing there. It was surveying its territory. It was listening, waiting. Jed saw the way the horse would shift its immense weight, not with restlessness, but with purpose. It would take a few steps, circle the clearing, but always return to its position in front of him, keeping him in its line of sight. It was a guard, but what was it guarding, and what was it waiting for? The questions gnawed at him, more unsettling than the fear of an attack. An attack was simple, understandable. This silent, patient, intelligent observation was something else entirely. It felt like a chess match where he didn't know the rules, and his opponent was a creature he had always believed to be nothing more than a beast of instinct. He was wrong, terribly wrong. And as the sun began to dip lower, painting the snowy landscape in hues of orange and purple, Jed felt a new kind of fear. Not the fear of dying, but the fear of the unknown, of a purpose he could not fathom, unfolding slowly before his helpless, upside-down eyes. The answer to his question, what was the horse waiting for, came as the last light of day bled from the sky. It came not as a sight, but as a sound. A sound that made the hairs on Jed's neck stand on end, a sound that every creature in these mountains knew and feared. It was Scarface. The sound was closer than Jed had anticipated. Much closer. A jolt of pure adrenaline shot through him, momentarily overriding the pain and the cold. He was defenseless. A perfect, helpless lure. The cougar would see him, an easy meal hanging from a branch, and it would be over in a flash of claws and teeth. He squeezed his eyes shut, a lifetime of confidence reduced to a single desperate prayer. He expected the giant horse to bolt, to save its own skin from the apex predator of the mountain. Any sane animal would. But Titan did not run. Jed opened his eyes. The giant stallion had transformed. Its calm, observant demeanor was gone, replaced by a controlled, focused aggression. Its head was high, its nostrils flared wide, and a low, guttural snort rumbled from its deep chest. It was a sound of pure challenge. Titan began to paw at the hard-packed snow, his massive hooves striking the ground like hammers, a clear display of power and defiance. And then it did something that made Jed's mind reel. Titan moved, not away from the danger, but towards it. He deliberately positioned himself, planting his immense frame like an ancient oak tree, creating a physical barrier between Jed and the unseen threat on the rocks. He was shielding him. He was protecting his bait. In that instant, Jed's entire understanding of the situation was turned on its head. The horse was not his enemy. It wasn't waiting for him to die. It had been waiting for this. For the real predator to reveal itself. For the first time since he woke up, Jed felt a flicker of something other than terror. It was a dawning, shocking, and utterly confusing realization. For some reason, in this deadly game, the giant, silent horse was on his side. They had a common enemy. The silence that followed the predator's cry was more profound than any that had come before. It was a silence filled with calculation. The immediate threat had passed Scarface. Was a patient hunter. It would not attack recklessly, but the board was now set. All the pieces were in place. Jed hung there, the blood still pounding in his head, but his thoughts were surprisingly clear. The cold had numbed his body, but it had sharpened his mind to a razor's edge. He replayed the horse's actions over and over. The silent vigil, the lack of aggression, the instant, protective reaction to the cougar. It didn't add up. Kindness? An animal showing mercy? Jed had spent his life in the wild, and he knew that nature was a brutal, unsentimental place. Mercy was a human luxury. This was something else. This was strategy. After a long, tense moment, Titan seemed to relax his defensive stance. He turned his great head and looked back at Jed, his dark eyes seeming to hold a question. Then, he did something so deliberate, so intelligent, so utterly unbelievable that for a moment, Jed was certain the cold and the pain were making him hallucinate. Titan walked, with a slow, purposeful gait, towards the spot where Jed's Winchester rifle lay partially buried in the snow. He stopped, his massive hooves planted on either side of the weapon. He lowered his head, his warm breath sending up a cloud of steam around the cold steel of the rifle. Jed watched, breathless, his heart hammering against his ribs. What was it doing? Was it going to trample the one thing that could save him? But Titan didn't trample it. With a gentleness that seemed impossible for a creature of his size, he nudged the rifle with his muzzle. Not randomly. He pushed it, skillfully, sliding it across the snow. He nudged it again, and then again, each movement precise, controlled. He was pushing the rifle, inch by painful inch, directly towards Jed's dangling, outstretched hand. Jed's fingers brushed against the cold, familiar wood of the stock. He could scarcely believe it. His mind, the mind of a master trapper, a student of animal behavior, struggled to find a logical explanation. And then, in a sudden, blinding flash of insight, the truth hit him. It was a revelation so shocking, so profound, that it completely rewrote his understanding of the world. This wasn't an act of compassion. This was a tactical decision. Titan was not a magical savior. He was a general. Jed's mind raced, the pieces of the puzzle snapping into place with dizzying speed. The cougar, Scarface, wasn't just a threat to ranchers. It was a threat to the wild horse herd, to their foals. Titan, as the lead stallion, was responsible for protecting his family. But a cougar was a stealthy, deadly predator, difficult for a creature of Titan's size to fight effectively. He was a tank, but the cougar was an assassin. And in that moment, Jed understood his own role in this deadly drama. He wasn't the victim. He was the weapon. Titan couldn't pull the trigger, but it knew what the rifle was. It had seen men use them. It had associated the loud bang with death. And it was intelligent enough to understand that the man, the trapper, the hunter, was the only creature on this mountain capable of wielding that power effectively. It hadn't protected Jed from the cougar. It had protected its asset. It needed Jed alive, and it needed him armed. The silent vigil wasn't about deciding whether to kill him. It was about waiting for the right moment, waiting for the common enemy to appear to confirm Jed's purpose. The cold, heavy weight of the Winchester in his hand was the most comforting feeling Jed had ever known. Power had been restored. A dozen frantic plans flashed through his mind. He could try to shoot the rope that held him, a risky shot that could ricochet, or cause him to fall badly. He could fire a shot into the air to scare the horse away, then figure out the trap himself. The old Jed, the arrogant trapper from that morning, would have done just that, reasserting his dominance, proving he needed no help from a dumb animal. But he was not the same man he was that morning. Hanging there, helpless, he had been humbled, staring into the intelligent eyes of the great horse. He had been enlightened. He looked from his rifle to the silent, waiting stallion. He saw the shared purpose in its gaze. He understood the unspoken contract that had been offered. This was his all-in moment, a choice that would define him. It was a choice between his old pride and a new, profound understanding. He chose understanding. He did not shoot the rope. He did not try to scare the horse. Instead, he made a decision that went against every survival instinct he had. He chose to wait. He chose to remain the bait. With painstaking effort, Jed positioned the rifle, bracing the stock against his shoulder in a horribly awkward upside-down stance. He checked the action, his movements slow and deliberate to conserve every ounce of energy. He was no longer a helpless victim. He was a hunter again, but this time, he was not alone. He and the silent, giant horse were now partners in the deadliest ambush he had ever conceived. They were two predators, one of instinct and one of intellect, united against a common foe. They would use the trap not as a prison, but as a lure. And they would wait, in the cold, gathering darkness, for their enemy to make its final, fatal mistake. The waiting was a new kind of agony. Every nerve in Jed's body was screaming. The pain in his ankle was a white-hot fire, and the pressure in his head was immense. His arms, holding the weight of the rifle against gravity, trembled with a fatigue so deep it felt like his bones were turning to dust. But he held on. His focus, once born of pride, was now forged in a shared, desperate purpose. He was no longer just fighting for his own life. He was holding up his end of a silent bargain, a pact made with a creature he had once seen as nothing more than a magnificent beast. He now knew better. He was in the presence of an equal. He listened, using the skills he had honed over a lifetime. He listened past the sound of his own labored breathing, past the creak of the rope. He listened for the telltale sign of the hunter becoming the hunted, the soft, almost imperceptible crunch of a paw on snow, the dislodging of a single pebble. Titan listened too. The great horse stood as still as the ancient trees, a living seismograph, sensing vibrations in the earth, tasting the air for any change in scent. They were a two-part predator, one listening to the ground, the other watching the sky, united in their deadly, silent vigil. The attack came with the shocking suddenness that only a cougar can muster. There was no warning growl, no roar. One moment, the clearing was empty and silent. The next, a sleek, muscular shadow detached itself from the rocks above. Scarface. It moved with a liquid grace, a silent, flowing river of death. It had been watching them, waiting for the horse to leave, waiting for the man to exhaust himself completely. Seeing its opportunity, it leaped. It was a magnificent, terrifying sight, a blur of tawny fur and extended claws, soaring through the moonlight, aimed directly at the most vulnerable target, the dangling, helpless man. In that split second, as the cougar launched its attack, the genius of Titan's strategy was revealed. Just as the predator reached the apex of its leap, committing its entire body to the attack, Titan exploded into action. He did not charge. He did not attack the cougar. He executed a perfect, calculated diversion. He reared up onto his hind legs, his colossal form blotting out the moon, and let out a deafening, piercing scream, a sound of pure, unadulterated fury. It was a sound designed to do one thing: to break the cougar's concentration. And it worked. For a fraction of a second, the cougar's eyes, which had been locked onto Jed, flickered towards the sudden, massive threat. Its body twisted instinctively in midair, preparing to defend itself from this new, unexpected enemy. It was a minuscule hesitation, a fatal one. That was all the time Jed needed. His world was a swirling, upside-down chaos, but his hunter's instincts were absolute. He didn't aim, he reacted. The rifle, which had felt impossibly heavy just a moment before, was now a seamless extension of his will. He fired. The roar of the Winchester shattered the forest silence, a single, definitive clap of thunder. Upside down, fighting against gravity and the searing pain, Jed's shot was true. The cougar's trajectory ended abruptly in midair. It hit the ground with a heavy, lifeless thud, just feet from where Jed was hanging. The battle was over. The silence that fell was different now. It wasn't tense. It was final. The threat was gone. The common enemy was defeated. Jed let the rifle fall from his numb fingers. A wave of exhaustion so profound it almost made him black out washed over him. He had done his part. He watched as Titan, his task as a strategist complete, now became the engineer. The great horse walked calmly to the base of the tree. He turned, and with a strength that was terrifying to behold, he began to push against the thick branch Jed was hanging from. He didn't ram it. He leaned into it, putting his immense weight and the power of his neck and shoulders into a steady, grinding pressure. The branch groaned, protesting under the strain. Jed felt himself being lifted, then jostled. He could hear the fibers of the wood groaning and snapping. With a final, mighty shove, the rope, its anchor point shifted, slipped from the end of the branch. Jed fell the last few feet into a soft snowbank, landing in a heap. The sudden release from the trap was so abrupt, the rush of blood back through his body so painful, that for a moment he could only lie there, gasping. When he finally pushed himself up, shaking and bruised, the horse was gone. Titan had vanished back into the shadows of the forest as silently as he had appeared, his end of the bargain fulfilled. Jedediah Stone returned to the settlement 3 days later, not with the swagger of a triumphant bounty hunter, but with the quiet humility of a man who had been fundamentally changed. He was limping, his ankle badly sprained, but he walked with a new kind of purpose. He confirmed to the ranchers that the cougar known as Scarface was dead, but when they offered him the substantial bounty, he refused it. "I wasn't the only hunter on that mountain," was all he said, an explanation that no one understood, but one that he knew in his bones to be true. He was no longer just a trapper. He had been humbled by a force of nature far more intelligent and complex than he had ever imagined. He had learned that the world was not simply divided into traps and fools. There was a third category, partners, found in the most unlikely of places. The legend of the Phantom Stallion of Black Ridge grew, but with a new chapter. Some said the horse had a ghostly protector, a man who would leave offerings at the edge of its territory. And they were right. The final scene of our story is not of Jed in a tavern, boasting of his kill. It is of him, months later, at the foot of the mountain pass leading to Black Ridge. He quietly unloads a heavy sack from his horse, not a trap, not a weapon, but a bag filled with the finest oats and sweet apples. He leaves it there, at the entrance to the forest. It was a payment for a debt, an offering of respect, a silent thank you from one master strategist to another. The wild speaks a language all its own, a language of strategy, survival, and unexpected alliances. If this story of a hunter who became the bait moved you, share it and spark a conversation about the intelligence of the natural world. Don't forget to subscribe for more shocking tales from the untamed West.